For this installment of the Human-Centered Design Method series, we're going to be talking about the thinking hats. I am Sarah Brooks, Program Director for the Consortium for Public Education. And what are the thinking hats? Each hat color represents a corresponding perspective for feedback on an idea, experience, product, or service. This method was developed in the 1980s by Edward de Bono and was originally called the 6 thinking hats. Feedback and reflection can be difficult for team members to do. This can be extremely frustrating because reflection and feedback lead to iteration, which improves an idea or a product of any kind. The thinking hats method is a great way to have both reflection and feedback occurring at the same time, but with some parameters in place. It is also easily accessible for all ages and abilities. Self-reflection and gathering feedback are extremely important parts of the design cycle. Reflecting and gathering feedback is commonly part of the testing phase. However, and when appropriate, it is important to reflect and gather feedback during every phase of the design cycle. We have found that the longer you work on something, the further down the love time continuum you go. This means your team's growing ownership of an idea, product, or service makes it more difficult for them to modify it towards the end of its final rollout or presentation. So be sure to ask for feedback from a variety of perspectives and people, and do it periodically throughout development. We use 5 different colored hats to represent different perspectives: orange, yellow, green, red, and blue. This is the process that we use. However, as you will see, the thinking hats can be easily modified. So the orange hat represents the reporter. This perspective focuses on just the facts, where new information is needed, and they ask who, what, where, when, and why, as well as how type questions. The yellow hat is the optimist. This perspective considers the positives, identifies strengths, and finds the value or benefit of an idea, product, service, or idea. The green hat is the creative hat. This perspective looks for new opportunities, suggests ideas, and considers alternatives. The red hat is the emotional hat. This perspective expresses gut reactions, shares their fears, their concerns, their excitements, and their intuitions. And finally, the blue hat. This is the pessimist hat. This perspective considers challenges and potentials for failures. They look for dangers and for difficulties. Whatever type of perspective you are using, please remember, feedback should be kind, specific, and helpful. What kind, specific, and helpful means to your group should be discussed, agreed upon, and referred back to often. So what does this method look like when it's done in person versus virtual? In person, feedback is best given using stickies and markers because stickies are movable, can be written anonymously, and are small, which keeps responses short. And markers allow for the feedback to be more easily seen. Stickies and markers can be costly, so feel free to use other tools or materials to provide short anonymous feedback. This in-person example shows how the thinking hats were used to address the real-world connections element found in PBL. As you can see, the feedback was then clustered together in large themes, which are identified by drawing a circle around them and naming them. So themes such as time, authentic, and how to get it done, learning outcomes, were addressed by using the feedback done from the thinking hats. When done virtually, a virtual whiteboard can be very helpful. A couple of different virtual whiteboards we have found success with are Jamboard and Padlet. Jamboard uses virtual stickies of different colors to give feedback using different perspectives. Padlet does much the same way, except you can change the formatting of how those stickies are organized on the virtual whiteboard. Here's an example of a thinking hats done virtually using Jamboard. Here's an example of what Padlet looks like if you wanted to use this virtual whiteboard instead. You can still gather feedback as a group, which could be large or small, on a shared experience. And each piece of feedback can have its color changed to a specific color which represents a specific perspective. Tips and tricks when using the thinking hats method. This is a method that can be easily modified. Only a few of the hats could be used at any given time, depending on the type of feedback your team is looking to gather. Hats can be assigned to specific team members. Change the hats to represent different perspectives or different roles. And this strategy can also be used with large groups, small groups, and in pairs. For example, you could use the hats to identify how specific positions within a company could give feedback. Or you could ask your team members to use the hats to represent different roles. The orange hat could be a project manager, yellow hat, HR manager, green hat, financial. Or, in terms of roles, you could have an engineering hat, and those perspectives would consider the materials, the structure, and the function of a concept. A historian hat, what has been done in the past? A critic hat, why is the concept lacking? To review. As a method, the thinking hats give teams and team members different perspectives to give feedback from, increasing the variety of feedback. These perspectives can be easily modified to give feedback from an infinite amount of perspectives, roles, and viewpoints. Also, remember to choose hats that are the most appropriate for your setting and will give feedback that is useful and actionable for your team. Thanks so much for watching. Let us know if you have any questions. We're happy to talk about all things HCD all the time.